nothing but involving the application of fundamental ethical principles to planning, conducting, and publishing of research. So now you would be well versed in how to plan a research, conduct a research, and publish a research. But before we do all that, we need to keep these fundamental ethical principles in mind whenever we plan a research. So everybody has this one question in mind: I am a good person, so why do I need to worry about research ethics? So what I would like to say is research ethics isn't about bad people doing bad things. It is just about imperfect people doing imperfect things for a variety of reasons. So the whole life or all concepts are basically founded on the moral foundation theory. So all our principles should be based on this moral foundation theory, which says care and do no harm. Always there should be a fairness and no cheating. There should be loyalty and no betrayal. There should be authority and no subversion. There should be purity and no degradation. There should be liberty and no oppression. This is the moral foundation theory for life. So when we say moral foundation for research, so we have certain things modified which says doing good for humans, animals, planet, future generations, that is via the pursuit of truth and knowledge. It is our duty to respect individuals, a possible duty to animals, and our obligations to the society. So that's the moral foundations for any research. So when we say principles of ethical principles of research, it is basically 4 of them, which says beneficence, that is do good; non-maleficence is do no harm; autonomy, everybody has the right to choose and respect their confidentiality and privacy; justice, treat everyone as the same. So these are the 4 basic principles for any research. So this beneficence and non-maleficence are there right from the days of Hippocrates, and the autonomy and respect, justice evolved on the later dates. So when we say autonomy means you give the right to the participant to decide. So from the autonomy springs informed consent, truth-telling, and confidentiality. We will deal with this in the later part of the presentations. So why there should be research ethics? So there are 3 reasons why there should be research ethics. So we will deal with one by one. So the first one says to protect participants, patients, society, resources, and the researcher. So when we say protect, what do we protect? The participants or anybody who's involved in the research from harm. We need to show respect to their privacy or confidentiality, and we need to get an informed consent from the patient, from the participants. We should always refrain from exploitation of vulnerable participants and refrain from indiscriminate use of resources. So when we say informed consent and all that, it all started off from the Nuremberg Code in 1948. So why did the Nuremberg Code come into action? There were a group of German scientists who did research on participants without their consent, and there were some mishappenings in that research. So after that came in the Nuremberg Code in 1948, which was the first international document which said voluntary participation and informed consent is mandatory for anyone who is enrolled in the research. Voluntary consent of all the human subjects are absolutely essential. When we say informed consent, that is you inform the patient and then get their consent. That is the subject should be given opportunity to choose what shall not happen to them. And the consent process should include information on what is being done to them, comprehension, explanation in detail, and voluntariness. That is, they should be given the choice to choose whether to participate or not. The informed consent should always be obtained before the participant enters the research, and there should be no influence of the participants, such as monetary benefits or any other benefits given to them, told that they will be given such benefits and then enroll. That is not allowed. It is not ethical to influence a participant to consent for the research. So when we say informed consent, it can be either written or it can be a verbal consent which can be recorded. So now, earlier we used to get only a written consent, but now many of the organizations like ICMR, they expect a recorded verbal consent from the patient. So the second code is the Helsinki Declaration, which came into play in the 1964. So what does the Helsinki Declaration says? It says that research on humans should always be based on the results from the laboratory and animal research. You cannot do a human research without testing it first in the lab and then on the animals. Only when a research is proved in the laboratory and animals, it can be progressed to the human research. The research protocols should be reviewed by a committee before initiation. Informed consent from participants is absolutely necessary, and research should be conducted by medically, scientifically qualified individuals. Anybody and everybody cannot do a research. And always, risk should not exceed benefits. That is something which we need to keep in mind. So when we say research, the current date, there are n number of research which is coming on the genetic researches. So what does ICMR is a body for medical research, that is the Indian Council for Medical Research, which is the national body for research conducted in the country. What does it say about ethical practice in genetic research? India is one of the few developing countries which has guidelines existing for genetic services and research for biobanking, which is issued by the ICMR. It's called the National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical Research and Health Research involving human participants. So in case anyone is doing a research on genetic research, you need to follow these guidelines mandatorily to do any research. And coming to the ethical issues in cell line research. So you know what's a cell line research, right? So in those cases, we need to have a patient information sheet provided to the participant. The patient should give an informed consent. No financial benefit should be gained by the donor, that is the donor of the cells. Confidentiality of the donor should be maintained at any cost. Coming to the animal research. So in an animal research, all our perceptions are like animal research can be done anyways. No, it cannot be done. It also has certain guidelines to be followed because animals do have intrinsic values and they should be respected. Animals are also creatures with capacity to feel pain and they should also be considered. The quick lesson in animal subject is 3 R's. What are the 3 R's? Refine, reduce, and replace. So whenever you do an animal research or a research on an animal subject, refine the experiment to cause less pain and distress, reduce the number of animals used if possible, and replace higher order animals with lower order animals. So you always keep in mind the 3 R's for any animal research. Coming to the Animal Ethics Committee, any animal research should be approved by the Animal Ethics Committee. So it provides the avenue for public participation in the regulation of animal research. It is responsible for approving and monitoring animal research. The accredited animal research establishments can be approached and the study has to be approved by these establishments. Not all institutions will have an animal research set up. So wherever you are conducting the research, the animal thing should have an animal research committee, ethics committee will be there, and it has to be approved through the committee, and only then the study can be started. Like a human ethics committee approval, animal ethics committee is also very active and it has to be going through this committee for any research on animal subjects. So coming to the second point, and why should there be research ethics? So it is to ensure accuracy of scientific knowledge. So when we say scientific knowledge accuracy, what do we mean by that? The study should be methodically rigorous and there should be a very fair subject selection. You should state the research method clearly. You should never falsify, modify, or omit any data. Use actual data for analysis. You should always report any errors that is encountered. You should always be aware of the conflict of interest. Data and materials should be available to others. Accuracy in the process of peer review. So when we say conflict of interest, what do we mean by that? There might be a situation in which one experiences conflicting pulls of one's personal interest and from one's professional obligations. For example, there may be a funding agency which may stipulate that they have the right to decide whether you can publish your findings or not. That is, your study may be funded by a funding agency that may be a manufacturing of the product, and you might be getting results which might not be favoring the funding agency. So they may stipulate that they have the right to decide. So you should always declare all your conflict of interest. You should always declare the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth is be honest about your study. Declare all the results of your study. And you should always say the entire truth. You should never omit any part of the research findings that might constitute research misconduct or violate other moral norms. And always declare truth and nothing but the truth. It's also dishonest to puff up one's results by adding irrelevant or misleading information or overstating their significance. So you need to declare entire truth and do not omit any parts, and always be honest about what you got in your results. What do you understand by the peer review process? It is basically a review process which has a step-by-step review process which will have fairness in reviewing. There will be appropriate expertise. Identifiable reviewers will be there in the process. There will be timely review and helpful critics. So when a research passes through this review process, you get a lot of inputs and there will be fairness in the conduct. And if this process is going to be absent, the integrity of your research will be lost. So always make sure that the research goes through a peer review process. Coming to the third point, which says to protect intellectual and property rights. So what do you understand by intellectual and property rights? You might, whenever there is somebody whose work is being quoted, always refer to the person who originally had made this invention. So reference should be made to the original author. Always acknowledge everyone who has helped you in the study, and citations and authorships are very important. So when you decide the authorship of your study, you should know what are the various types of authorships. So authorship is nothing but giving credits and implies accountability for your published work. So make sure one who has contributed to the paper, that is your research work, is always given credit, and they are called the authors. People who are recognized as authors should understand their responsibility and accountability for what is being published. So all the authors are those who have been associated throughout the research work. So what is a lead author? Is nothing but a first author who usually performs the central experiment of the project. A co-author is the one who's made a significant contribution to a research or a journal. Corresponding author in a journal is one among the authors who will handle all the correspondence for the publication and will sign the agreement. So the corresponding author takes all the responsibilities on behalf of all the authors. What is a gift authorship? These are something which we need to avoid. A gift authorship is nothing but gifting an authorship to a person in exchange to some help they have done in other means. These kind of gift authorships should be avoided. Forged authorship, that is, you take the work of others and publish it in your name, is forged authorship. And again, this should also be strictly avoided. Coming to the ghost authorship, that is, a person who has actually contributed to the research is being omitted, is actually ethical not right. They may be left behind for various reasons, but that is not right. Whoever has contributed to the research should be given an authorship. So what do we understand by the term author and contributed? Who is an author and who is a contributor? Author is the one who is involved in all aspects of the creation of the work, and a contributor is the person who has merely provided technical support. So an author will always be associated from the start to the finish, whereas contributed would have just given you a technical support. So authorships and contributors, you need to understand the difference so that you can decide who has to be the author of your research work. And always disclose the research funding. Whoever has funded the research, the disclosure of research funding should be done. That is, acknowledge the sources of support of all the activities leading to or facilitating the preparation of the publication or a manuscript. The grant funding and the gift support and technical support, all this has to be disclosed in the details on the funding or in the acknowledgement section of the article. So this is mandatory because fund is one big support which we receive to do a good research. So coming to what happens when there is breach of ethics in research would lead to scientific misconduct. So let us see what is a misdemeanor. We may try to justify the shortcuts that we take, that we actually shouldn't do all this, but we sometimes justify. Sometimes the case may not be very clear. That is whether it is ethically right or ethically wrong. So these are called as the ethical dilemmas. Sometimes we have to think about the implications of an action in order to see the research ethics issues. So all these are certain conditions where we justify ourselves that, okay, it's okay not to follow the ethical rules. But again, ethics need to be in the back of your mind whenever you do any actions, be it research or it's a life principle. So let us see certain ethical issues in the following scenario. So see if you can identify what are the ethical issues, because these are certain conditions which we come across on a daily basis. So the case one is we have two graduate students who have made measurements on a new materials. That is, to prove their hypothesis, the results should lie on the curve. So when we don't get certain results within the curve, the students, they're considered omitting the two data points which were off the theoretical curve. So now let me know whether this is right. Can we omit certain data and then evaluate only those which are actually falling within the curve? Can we do that actually? No. It is unethical because it would amount to the falsification of the data. So we should always include outliers and give probable reasons, or we can also find various methods to statistically trim these outliers. Outliers are nothing but those which are those values which lie away from the cluster of results which we always get. So these extreme values we shouldn't actually omit, but we can find certain statistically acceptable ways wherein we can trim these outliers. So this is another second case, which is again a group of students who have conducted a research on the awareness of diet and dental caries. So later, they submitted the same research paper to two different journals to see which journal publishes it first. So this is a very common scenario which we come across in our day-to-day. We have a lot of postgraduate students saying, can we submit the same research in two journals? Is it okay? Of course, it is not okay. Why? It is unethical as it would result in inadvertent double counting or inappropriate weighting of the results of a single study, which will distort the available evidence. So you should never submit a research in two journals simultaneously. Always submit your research paper, wait for the remarks from that journal, and then proceed to the next. We should submit to one, wait for the response, and then submit to another. This is the ethical way of submitting your research paper to any journal. So this is another case three. This also we come across very often. 4 friends decide to work together on a research project during their vacation. One of them goes abroad. They decide, but they don't do the research, and one among them goes abroad during the vacation and is unable to contribute to the research. Since they were friends, they wanted to include all 4 names in the presentation made at the scientific congress. This happens quite often with all our postgraduate students. They form a group of 4, only 2 does the work, the remaining 2 just gives the name. Is that right? No, it is unethical, as only those who contributed intellectually should be cited as authors. Those who contribute in other ways may be acknowledged. They can be contributors, but they cannot be an author. So these are certain scenarios where we come across ways where we justify ourselves for not following rules and standards. So there should be some body which says, no, what you're doing is not ethical and you cannot breach ethics. So who can control, or who sets the standards or the regulates all the policies? It is the institution's ethical review committee or the institutional review board, which will monitor the various standards of any research conducted in that particular institution. So coming to the mission, or what are the objectives of an institutional ethical committee or the institutional review board? Basically, they maintain ethical standards of practice in research. They ensure protection of subjects, research workers from harm or exploitation. They provide reassurance to the public. They protect researchers from unjustified criticism. Why do everybody breach or they take shortcuts? We have always an excuse. We say there is a lot of pressure from the institution or from the peers which says publish or perish. We sometimes take shortcuts to retain a job. Sometimes we do things to keep up with our peers. Securing grants has now become a very big peer pressure amongst various faculties and the postgraduates, and also the pressure to discover or being the first to discovery that or to obtain patents has now become a big pressure from various institutions and peers. Yes, we have to keep up with all this pressure, but we still can follow all the ethical principles or the ethical guidelines that needs to be followed. The breach of these ethics cannot be an excuse. That is, all these pressures cannot be an excuse to breach. If you really want to do it, you do it. And there are no excuses. I would like to conclude this talk by a very strong statement which says, wrong is wrong, even if everyone is doing it, or right is right if no one is doing it. So there is no excuse for breach of ethics, not only in research or in all your day-to-day activities or in your life.